Hi. Welcome to the very first episode of History in the Kitchen. I'm Cheryl Ann Amendola. My students call me Mrs. Amendola. And I'm really, really glad that you're here to cook with me and to learn a little bit about Juneteenth. So welcome. I hope I didn't start a little bit too early. I promised 1 o'clock, and I think it's just about that time. Feel free to comment if you would like to, or don't. It's totally up to you. If you have questions, I'll do my very best to answer them. And if you have any suggestions for the next History in the Kitchen, which is next Friday at 1 o'clock, just let me know. Okay, so happy Juneteenth, everybody. I think I'm just going to wait one more minute because it is 12:59. So I'll fiddle with my ingredients for a moment. I have my cornstarch, which I haven't opened yet, so maybe I should open that. Before we get started, make sure you have all of your kitchen utensils that you need. You're going to need a saucepan for your stovetop. You are going to need a pie crust, and while I'm talking, you can start cooking that pie crust, and I'll tell you what to do to make sure that it stays flat and doesn't bubble up on the bottom. I cheated. I didn't make my own pie crust. You're going to need a dry measuring cup, 2/3 of a cup. If you don't have 2/3, you can also cheat with that and use the wet measuring thing. Tablespoon. And paring knife. Okay, so let's get started. Happy Juneteenth. Juneteenth is an Independence Day celebration, and it's a celebration of Blackness. While you are thinking and getting your stuff ready, I want you to think about when you first heard about Juneteenth. If you're a kid, maybe you've never heard about it at all, or maybe you heard about it from a friend. If you're an adult, this might be the very first time you're ever hearing about a Juneteenth celebration. As an adult and as a teacher, I didn't learn about Juneteenth until grad school, which is a really long time in a person's education. And in doing some research for today's lesson, I learned that around the beginning of the 20th century, so 1900, and around the end of the 19th century, we were changing the way, or Americans who were writing history books were changing the way that we looked at the Civil War. So if Juneteenth is a celebration of freedom and freedom from enslavement, and historians who were writing history books didn't want students to learn that the Civil War was about slavery, one of the ways that they did that was they took Juneteenth out of history books. In fact, I took out the American history book that I use, and I went to the index and I looked for Juneteenth, and it's not in there. And it absolutely should be. So the word Juneteenth combines two different words. It combines the word June and 19th to make Juneteenth. In 1865, over 250,000 enslaved Texans in Galveston were told or got the message that slavery was over from the Union Army. Texas was a part of the Confederacy in the Civil War. So when the Civil War broke out, and the Confederacy started, Texas was a part of that. And when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he essentially freed all enslaved people who were in the Confederacy. So that's an important thing for us to remember about freedom of enslaved people. The Emancipation didn't free all the enslaved people. There were some states in the Union during the Civil War, so in the North during the Civil War, that still allowed slavery. So those states were allowed to keep people enslaved. And in the Confederacy, there was a bit of an issue because the Union Army had to go and free all of these people because they were in rebellious states who weren't going to listen to Abraham Lincoln anyway. And that's not to say that many enslaved people did not take part in self-emancipation. The language that we use is really important. I try not to use the word runaway because it has a negative connotation. Self-emancipation gives people agency, so that's why we say that. So let's cook a little bit, and then we'll learn a little bit more about Juneteenth. One of the things that you need to do is you need to if you're using a pie crust that was pre-made, you need to put it in your pie plate, and put it in the oven for the next 10 minutes at about 450 degrees. It should turn this nice, golden brown color. Dropped a little bit. And then you can put your strawberry pie in it. The strawberries are not actually going in the oven because they will turn into goo if you bake a strawberry. Okay, so while you put that in the oven, I pre-did mine. We'll talk a little bit more about what Juneteenth means and what freedom means. So 2 years after the Civil War was over, when General Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, and 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the Union Army finally got into Texas to let enslaved people know that they were free, which is great. Why didn't the message get there earlier? In 1865, there was a telegraph, and Abraham Lincoln used that technology to send the message. Part of the reason why that message never got to those 250,000 enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, is because their enslavers did not tell them. They didn't give them the message. What they tried to do was try to get another cotton harvest out of enslaved people. So it wasn't until Major General George Granger came to Galveston and announced through General Order Number 3 that there was to be absolute equality for people in the South, and that there would be no more slavery at all. It is said that this 250,000 enslaved people in Texas are the very last enslaved people to know that they were freed through the Emancipation Proclamation. There's still a long way until we get to absolute equality. Juneteenth is a celebration of freedom and a celebration of equality, but it's also a reminder to us that absolute equality has not been achieved. So part of achieving absolute equality is learning about other cultures and acknowledging them, seeing color. So today's types of celebrations should be celebrated by everyone. Part of traditional celebrations in the 1800s meant people went to go and find their relatives who had formerly been enslaved. Elders would tell stories about enslavement. There was preaching and cheering. Formerly enslaved people, dressed up for these celebrations to get rid of the old clothes that they were given as enslaved people, which were rags, and put on something that showed their worth, that matched their worth. It's also important for us to remember that slavery didn't end with the Emancipation Proclamation. It ended with the 13th Amendment. It was passed January 31st, 1865, and then finally ratified in December 1865. But between those times, states like Delaware, who were part of the North, still allowed slavery. It's also important for us to remember that the enslaved people didn't willfully accept it. There were different types of rebellion. There was passive rebellion through art and culture and song, and there were also violent revolts. So part of the power of agency is really important for us to remember. And even after emancipation, there were still hurdles. There was an interesting quote that I read from tolerance.org that said, "Racism takes hold wherever it can, and with each victory, there's more to conquer." So it is a constant vigilance and a constant struggle to overcome racism, both systemic and in our own hearts. With Juneteenth, or back to Juneteenth, there are different types of foods, and we're going to get to the cooking piece of this. Different types of foods that are eaten, but red is a symbolic color for food, which is why we're making strawberry pie. Red food represents ingenuity. It represents resilience, but it also represents the bloodshed of Black people in their fight for freedom. Traditional foods were strawberry soda, also hibiscus tea. Hibiscus tea is red, and hibiscus is a flower that came from Africa over the Middle Passage to North America. Red drink. There's also watermelon, and as the celebrations evolved, we also found out that red velvet cake would be a really good, yummy substitute, but also very hard to make and something that is beyond my capability. My red velvet cake is chocolate. But then strawberry cake is also acceptable, and strawberries are red. So let's start making our strawberry cake. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments. I know I tend to talk a little bit quickly. Some of it's out of nervousness because this is my first episode. Some of it is just because I'm excited to be alive. Okay, so your pie crust should be almost ready. You're not going to need it for a little bit anyway. But you do need your 2 pounds of strawberries. So while your pie is baking, first and most important thing is to wash our hands. So we are going to do that first. That's always there goes a strawberry. That's always the most important thing that you need to do before you start cooking. I like to do the preamble to the Constitution of the United States while I'm washing my hands for 20 seconds. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We gain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. There, my hands are clean. I'm gonna dry them off. Okay. Now that we've washed our hands, and hopefully our strawberries, even if your strawberries are organic, you need to wash them. You're going to take your 2 pounds of strawberries and you are going to hull them. So take a teeny tiny little knife. This is the kind my grandmother used to use to peel garlic. And you're gonna cut the tops off like this. The smaller berries are a lot easier to hull, I find. And you're gonna pull out the center, okay? This one's not particularly neatly done. This one looks right. And when you pull it out, it should look like this. Don't worry if you mess up and it looks like this the first time or the second time or ever. It's still going to taste good as long as you have the hull. All right, so let's pull this out. Okay, and there we go. Okay. Once you have your strawberries hulled, you're going to cut them. Your small ones, so the little guys, cut into 4s. Okay. And your big guys, you're going to cut into 8s. Okay. Mine are all small right here. And while you're cutting, I'm going to go grab my bowl of strawberries. Elise, bake the pie crust at 450 for about 10 minutes or until it turns brownish. If you don't have a pie weight and you want to make sure that your pie crust doesn't bubble, you could always put in a piece of tin foil and some rice or beans to hold the pie crust down. If it does bubble, it's not going to affect the taste, so don't worry. Let me go grab my strawberries. And my family will be barbecuing tonight in celebration of Juneteenth because Black history is American history. Okay, so I cheated. I prepared before we came. Okay, and I have my strawberries all ready to go. Okay, once my 2 pounds of strawberries are cut, I need to divide them. And I'm gonna need 1.5 cups of strawberries to cook. I'm gonna put this 1.5 cups of strawberries into a saucepan. Since my hands are washed and I'm kind of a hands-on cook, I like to taste and touch and smell, I'm gonna use my hands to put them in here instead of a spoon. Additionally, my fingers will probably do less damage to the berries anyway, even though they're just gonna go get smushed, okay, in the pan. So I need 1.5 cups of strawberries to go in my pan. So if you're just coming in, hi, welcome to the first History in the Kitchen. We talked a lot or a little, depending on how much you know about history, about Juneteenth. The ins and outs of history are really, really complex. And if you have more questions or want to know more, you can always feel free to ask. Oh, Danny, you have this bowl too? Pyrex, right? If you're just tuning in, Juneteenth is an Independence Day. It's a celebration of independence of enslaved people. It's also a celebration of Blackness, but it's also something that we need to remember that it's more complicated than that. just to review, remember, Emancipation Proclamation only frees the the enslaved people in Confederate states. The Union Army has to go to force Confederate states to free enslaved people. There were still enslaved people in the North during this time. It's the 13th Amendment that really brings freedom from slavery, but there's still struggle. Remember, racism takes hold wherever it can. All right, so we're going to take our strawberries, our nice red strawberries that represent, the color represents ingenuity and resilience and bloodshed of African people, African American people, Black people, fighting for freedom in our country. And we're going to put them in a saucepan. So here's my saucepan. Oops, you guys fell. I'm still perfecting this. Remember, you're in episode 1. Okay, so there's my saucepan. I'm going to take my 1.5 cups of strawberries and I'm going to put them in my saucepan. And I'm going to crush them with a big spoon. So my house, it's a big wooden spoon. So I'm going to crush my berries for my strawberry pie for dessert after my Juneteenth barbecue this afternoon. And you guys should check your communities. There are a lot of rallies going on today for Black freedom and to end racism. And many of them are also Juneteenth celebrations. So you may be able to go march and be a part of a larger community celebration. Just remember, practice social distancing, wash your hands, wear your mask. Okay, so once I've crushed them a little bit, I'm going to need heat to help me crush the rest. So I'm going to put my stove on medium heat. I'm also going to move my lime so that you can see. Okay, got my heat on medium. And once I have them crushed a little bit or a lot, that's when I'm going to add my next ingredients. So just so that you are ready and prepared, next ingredients are cornstarch, sugar, and water. Okay, but we're not adding those quite yet. This is about the time you're going to want to take your pie crust out of your oven if it's in there, because I think we've been together about 10 minutes so far, maybe more. Time flies when I'm teaching. My students often have to remind me that the period is over, because I could talk all day. For those of you who know me, which I think is all of you, you know I could talk about history all day because I've probably regaled you more than once. But history is important. Helps us learn where we came from and why things are the way they are now. Okay. I'm going to keep crushing the berries. I can't wait to eat this. I might sneak a piece before anybody else gets some, because I know 2 small children who have been bugging me for, number 1, the strawberries, and number 2, a piece of pie since this morning. Okay. Other things or other ways that you could probably crush your berries. Potato masher. So if you have one of those, you can grab it. I do not. And as you're crushing your berries, they should start looking soupy, like this. But make sure that they're all the way crushed, because the other berries that you're going to add will add the chewiness to it. You need these berries to be smashed so that they can hold the whole cake together, or the whole pie together. Okay. As you're chopping your berries, okay, so I think we're about ready for our next ingredient. Hopefully you guys are crushing berries at the same rate as I am. If you're not, that's okay. I'm going to post this video later, and I also will put it on YouTube. I know there were a couple of students of mine who were concerned that they weren't going to be able to watch it on Facebook because they don't have accounts. But once it's on YouTube, it's a lot more public. Okay. I'm going to give you another look at the strawberries in just a second. And thank you for coming on with me today. I'm really glad that you're here. I'm glad that you want to learn about Juneteenth. I'm glad that you want to learn about a history that is not necessarily always acknowledged in a proper way. Okay. And if you want, I'll post a lesson to my blog later, teachinghistoryherway.com. And thank you, Elise. And I will also post the document, order number 3, General Order number 3, for you. Interesting article in the Washington Post. The National Archives actually found the original copy of General Order number 3 this week. I don't know if they just never looked for it, because there are plenty of copies of it printed, but they found the actual original order in the archives this week. So I thought that was a pretty cool story. Okay, so here's what my berries look like at this point. It should be like super juicy. If it's not super juicy, you're doing something wrong, and you need to mash some more. It's also, besides being super juicy, gonna be really lumpy because you're smashing strawberries. You're not pureeing them, you're not putting them in a chopper, you're literally squishing them. So it should, at this point, look like this. Okay, so my next ingredient is going to be sugar. So I'm going to put my 2/3 of a cup of sugar in my saucepan with the strawberries while the heat's still on medium. We want that sugar to melt in there. So here's my sugar. And I'm going to give it a stir. And it smells really, really good. Should not take long for it to mix in there. Okay, so I've got my sugar all put in. The next thing I'm going to put in is I'm going to put in my tablespoon of water. And the last thing I'm going to put in is cornstarch, because this cornstarch is what's going to make it nice and thick, to make sure that it stays together. Okay, so I've got my cornstarch, I've got my water, I've got my sugar, I've got one berry that just did not want to smash. It's really beautiful red food. Okay, and next up is my cornstarch. I need 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. And if I need more, I'll check afterwards. I want to see how thick this gets first. I also want to make sure that I measure it correctly. So if you are not a baker, or if you don't cook a whole lot, make sure that when you're measuring it, you measure it evenly. You can use a knife to cut it, to kind of smooth it out so that it's smooth and you know you have a tablespoon. Yes, Danny, I'll post the recipe. Yep, recipe and lesson to blog and Facebook when I'm done. Okay. And then there's number 2. And I wish I could say this was my recipe, but it's not. I'll also post my sources later. Okay. And 3. Okay, let's give it a stir. I'm also making a terrible, terrible mess, but that's okay. All right. Now, the cornstarch is going to be kind of lumpy. You have to stir until all of the white lumps are gone. Okay. All right. And we're going to keep cooking this and stir it until it's thickened. So right now, it still looks like soup. I'll give it a stir for you. Okay, right now, it's still super soupy. But as those of us who cook and bake, we know that the cornstarch is going to thicken it up. All right, I'm going to stop stirring for just a minute. Get those cornstarch lumps out first. Okay, I'm going to leave that alone for just a minute, and I'm going to grab my pie crust to have it nice and close, so that when I'm ready to pour in, I can just do that. I'm also going to get my cutting board because the lime juice is going to be my next real lime. You can also use lime juice from a jar or a container. That's also fine. All right. I might need to add a little bit more cornstarch because it's still a little bit too soupy for my liking. So I'm gonna grab my cornstarch and I'm gonna add 1 more tablespoon. All right, get my knife so I can smooth it out. Perfect. Sure, yep. 1 more. Okay. So there are a lot of really great resources that you can go to learn about Juneteenth a little bit more. You can check out gilderlerman.org. They have a lot of primary sources about Juneteenth out of their vault today that they explain. You can always check out tolerance.org. They have a lot of really great articles, many of which I use to prepare for today's program. The LA Times is running a really great story today about Juneteenth and food, and how Juneteenth got started as a holiday in Los Angeles. Originally, it was just a holiday in Texas, but now practically every state celebrates it in some way. It's not a nationally recognized federal holiday yet. I am of the opinion that it should be. So I've signed a couple of petitions, and I'll be writing to my state senators and House members about this today. Interestingly enough, Juneteenth celebrations were really widespread up until about the 1910s through the 1960s. You need to use 2 tablespoons of lime juice. So I'm going to use half of a lime. So Juneteenth celebrations were kind of put on pause. Lots of people still did celebrate, mostly in Texas, but throughout the United States, because of people who were very specifically fighting against Black rights, it was dangerous to celebrate Juneteenth. Now, it was dangerous to celebrate Juneteenth even right after the Civil War, but things were also particularly awful during the Jim Crow era. So people stopped celebrating as enthusiastically as they had. Juneteenth actually made a comeback at the end of Martin Luther King's Poor People's Campaign. Unfortunately, MLK was assassinated before he could realize the goals of the Poor People's Campaign. However, Juneteenth was revived as a day of solidarity. All right, so turn this up just a smidge because I know people's time is valuable. There we go. Mine is starting to thicken. I'll show you what it looks like. It's not like super, super, super thick. It's just getting there. You'll notice it's still a little on the soupy side, but it's not juice like it was before. And the warmer it gets, the thicker it will get. So who knew you'd be getting a science lesson at the same time? All right. There we go. So, excellent. So even if you don't have a barbecue planned for today, you can always plan one for next year or celebrate a day late. That's also fine. Okay, I'm going to show you all what this looks like. I also don't want to burn myself. Part of not being an actual YouTuber is not having camera equipment for a stove. So let me show you. Okay, what this looks like. So you'll notice it's getting super thick. I have to be really careful. I don't want to burn it. Okay, but it's starting to look, there we go. The color is changing. So if yours is not thickening as quickly as you want it to, just turn up the heat. But don't turn it up too high, and you might not be in a rush, but you'll notice it's starting to look like jam. That's what it should look like. Essentially, you are making strawberry jam for this pie. So I am thinking that this is thick enough now. I'm just gonna remove it from the heat. So I'll take you with me while I go get a pot holder to put this on because I don't even want it on the stove anymore. I don't want it to burn. Okay, so now that I have it, and it should look like this. It should come off your spoon really slowly. It should look like strawberry jam. Essentially, that's what we just made as the base of our pie. All right, so next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add my 2 tablespoons of lime, 2 tablespoons of lime juice. So I'm gonna cut my lime and check for seeds, which I think I'm good. Squirt it in here. Now, the lime juice acts as a preservative to make sure that the berries stay red. Because remember, the whole idea is we want red food for that representation. Okay. Just gonna squeeze it a little more from the inside, and then I'm gonna give it a stir. Okay. So remember, it should be looking like jam at this point. You're stirring in your lime juice. I'm gonna move my garbage off the counter. This way you all can see what's happening. So stir in that lime juice. Okay, so should look like jam. I was just tempted to stick my fingers in this and have a taste. Don't do that, it's hot, okay? All right, next up, you don't have to wait for it to cool. You are going to put in your uncooked berries. So let's throw these berries in here and stir them in. Now, you have to be super delicate. My suggestion is that you simply fold and you don't stir because you don't want to crush the berries that are not cooked. All right, so let's take a look at what this looks like now, and it smells really good. If it smells bad, you did something wrong. Okay, so this is what it looks like at this point, and this is our pie filling. So there's no baking after you bake that pie crust. That's another reason why I really liked this recipe, because it's pretty simple. There aren't a whole lot of ingredients, and you can put your strawberries in your pie crust. So now I'm gonna take this, and I am going to pour my berries into my pie crust. And I'm gonna do it really carefully. My wrist is like crying because of how heavy the pot is. Okay. Got all that in there. That's good. I left a little bit of the jam on the bottom. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna try and scrape all that out because that's quite a bit. Check that out, look at all that. Yes, 2 tablespoons of lime juice. Okay. And the lime juice, remember, acts as a preservative. We wanna make sure that we keep that beautiful red color. That color of ingenuity, that color that represents resilience, and also that color that reminds us of the bloodshed, both past and present, of our Black brothers and sisters. Okay. And there you have it. So I'm just gonna spread these out so that it looks nice. I'm gonna try not to make a mess on the edge of the pie. And then of course, I'm going to let this cool. I'm gonna serve it chilled. I'm not gonna serve it hot. And here we have Juneteenth strawberry pie. So I thank you for coming today. Thanks for supporting History in the Kitchen. Thank you for supporting Juneteenth. Thank you for learning something new. I'm still learning, so if you have some things that you wish I had covered today, and or some things that you know that I didn't talk about, I would love to hear them. I would love to learn from you. If you have a suggestion for the next History in the Kitchen next Friday at 1 o'clock, let me know. I would love to cook based on your suggestions, or if there's a part of history that you're curious about. But just remember, today is Juneteenth. It's a celebration of independence. It's a celebration of the end of slavery. Slavery ends really with the 13th Amendment, but there's still a long way to go until we get that absolute equality, that General Order number 3 promised to those 250,000 enslaved people in Galveston, Texas so many years ago. So hopefully you've been able to use this time to reflect. Learning and listening is the number one thing that you can start with. Reflecting on yourself, you can think about that too. And where your biases are, both hidden and not so hidden. And then remember, there are also plenty of organizations that you can donate to, or you can find a march in your community or a barbecue that you can attend. So have a really super great day. Enjoy your pie. Happy Juneteenth, and hopefully I'll see you next Friday at 1.